What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk to you about SoFi. I want to go over some of the data points, break it down on what really moved it, and go over everything else you need to know. But first, make sure to hit that thumbs up. And with that, let's get right to it. So SoFi was able to pull a green today, 0.87%. Nothing crazy, but given that it did have a low of 24.18, definitely deserves a round of applause. 25.97 was the high, and that was hit first thing this morning, and a lot of volume. So 70 million shares being traded, 75 is the average. So interestingly enough, what caused all of this and this recovery is all because of the exact same thing. And all of that is because of the data that did come out. So non-farm payroll and unemployment. Non-farm came in at 22,000, forecast was 75. Unemployment came in at 4.3, forecast of 4.2. No different than pretty much every other labor-linked data this whole week has been negative. So you have a lot of individuals kind of selling out and spreading some fear because of this data. And then inversely, you actually have a lot of individuals very optimistic about this negative data. And thus, this is why you are getting kind of this type of motion. In addition to that, I think there was a certain level of optimism that SoFi was going to get included in the S&P 500, which that did come out, as you can kind of see right here. And regrettably, SoFi did not get added. I know a lot of Robinhood investors are probably pretty pumped up right now. So they, along with App11 and MicroStrategy, did get added. So you can kind of see that right there. So good stuff. It's going to come eventually for SoFi. It's just a matter of time. But nonetheless, all of this primarily was because of the data. And because of all this negative data, you do have now a 8% likelihood of a 50 basis point cut. It's a small amount, most likely won't actually occur, but you never know. There's a certain level of optimism. But overall, given all of the data points that came out this week, now we are pretty much fully confirmed for a 25 basis point cut. So that is very good for a lot of growth stocks, for the broader market, and especially SoFi. Aside from that, though, there was no actual news from SoFi today, no SEC filings or anything like that. So it was just merely piggybacking off the broader market. On Monday, this is where they do have this fireside chat. So the Goldman Sachs Tech Conference, and historically, I think just maybe one or two times it's been red, but historically it tends to go green during these fireside chats. So again, that's kind of a good thing going into potentially next week. Stay tuned for my video as well over the weekend, where I go over some expectations and everything that you need to be aware of. But aside from that, shorts did return 266,000 shares today. 9.39% of the free floats being shorted, works out to be 110.58 million shares overall being shorted. Looking at the options, you had 47 million in calls, 10 million in puts. 44% of all the options being done were bullish in nature. So that's definitely something very positive. But then again, pretty much no different than the broader market. So even though you had a lot of volatility kind of up and down with a lot of stocks, there was still a lot of optimism through options. So I think just generally the consensus is that we're going to be having now the next leg up. We're finally going to be getting a cut. And we've been kind of talking about this for a very long time. Looking at the bulls, so you see a consensus that pretty much it was going to land between that 25.50 and 26. So for the most part, that's where it landed. And then the bears, unfortunately, were rather, I guess, disappointed. They were anticipating 24. But with today being Friday, just take note of this. So 24.50 and below, you have a lot of smaller kind of open interest. And then you had 15,000 at that 25. And with us closing exactly at that 25.60, that does mean that the 25.50 and below strike prices are in the money. So 12,000 as well at the 25.50. So far, don't really see any crazy transactions on the dark pool. A couple big ones, but nothing to kind of fill that. So you might see a little bit of an extra push higher potentially going into next week, but still, even overall, this isn't anything crazy to get overly excited over. So it works out to be about 2.5 million shares. So not all that much, like I said. But aside from that, even looking at both the secondary market and dark pool, definitely a lot of big buying going on throughout the day. And of course, I think just algorithmic trading was kind of for the most part, the culprit why it was adding a certain level of suppression first thing. So you can kind of see just generally based on this right here, the flow, very, very popular as per usual. And one thing that I've really been bringing up, not just with SoFi, but actually a lot of other stocks, is this. So the flows, overall the inflow and outflow. So if you kind of analyze this a little bit more, sometimes the numbers don't jive. And so of course, that does mean that hedge funds usually, or at least the dark pool, is the culprit. And so it goes to show that hedge funds are buying SoFi, primarily in the dark pool, which never is included in the flow, just on a FYI. So I think in general, that's a good thing, even looking at the market position. So you had a lot of volatility yesterday, somewhat negative for the most part, but today you have a lot more buying. So a lot of good support levels being created, and it was able to fight back and get over that 10-day moving average. So this is a pretty good indication of momentum. So going into next week, you are seeing pretty much things looking pretty a-okay. And even aside from that, it's already above all the key moving averages that generally I like to look at. So the 50, 100, and also 200. Stochastic RSI, because of all the craziness that's happened pretty much this whole week, you do have SoFi rather oversold. So going into next week is kind of a unique circumstance, but yeah, it is what it is. I feel like if SoFi was to have gone added to that S&P 500, then yeah, SoFi would be up a solid like 5, 6, 7% just after hours alone. So I think that's going to be the next big thing. Of course, I think just generally it getting added to more ETFs, that's going to come. And with the most recent MSCI one that was on the 26th, I do believe, of August, that is going to be a pretty big deal. And most likely during the next 13 Fs, we will see a lot of institutions increase their position in SoFi. And most likely this is why you are seeing a lot of hedge fund purchases, as well as a lot of transactions on both the secondary market and dark pool. Aside from that, there was no new analyst ratings or anything along those lines. One thing I do want to bring up is Elliott Wave Technicals is now projecting for SoFi, at least in the short term, to hit that 29.01 as far as the high, as long as it's able to hold that 22.72. That's going to be a key pivot. But ultimately going over here with it closing at 25.60, it closed right below this pivot point. So 25.65 is going to be that key point to really watch for going forward. But nonetheless, I think SoFi is doing pretty a-okay. The fact that a lot of bears have been anticipating and kind of assuming that SoFi is going to pull back to like the $19 range and whatever else, it's I think SoFi is doing fairly well. Only thing I did with SoFi, straight out the gate, I actually did sell some covered calls. Didn't get all too much. I think I got like $50 in premiums or $80. But I did sell 26.50 calls first thing. So just for one day, I guess that's not too bad, $80. But I'm going to be starting to do a little bit more options and sharing that with you. As I've mentioned mid last week, I also did sell some puts, 17.50, and I think I pushed it out to January. So that's going to get me a couple $100. And so I'm going to be happy with that ultimately, because I don't really see SoFi pulling to those levels unless the broader market somehow from now until January does self-implode for whatever reason. I know some people might think it's coming, but people have been calling for a massive pullback for a while. And now the market is very fixated on interest rates. That's going to be the next big thing, right? So let me know your general thoughts and what you've been doing with SoFi. For those of you that have been doing options, what have you been doing? So let me know your thoughts. One final thing, pop over to my Patreon. I give buy signals on stocks, options, crypto, many of which have been absolutely on point and bangers. Even, for instance, yesterday, Lucid, another stock I do cover, I put down as a buy signal saying that at 16.50 it was going to be a buy and 18.50 was going to be an exit, and that literally was it. And I put out a lot of other similar day trades, no different than this, and so worthwhile to kind of take some time, pop over to the Patreon while over the weekend, link in the description below and also the comments, and take a look at it. With all that said, appreciate all of you watching.